July 5, 1943. Before dawn, the Kursk salient lies unnaturally still. A low fog clings to the rolling fields of western Russia, softening the edges of trenches, wire, and earthworks carved into the land over months of waiting. Beneath camouflage nets, engines idle quietly, steel warms in the dark. Men check watches they already know by heart. There is no rush here, no confusion, no surprise. On the Soviet side, soldiers remain below ground, pressed into layered defenses that stretch back farther than the eye can see, trenches behind trenches, minefields mapped to the meter, artillery already aligned on coordinates memorized weeks ago. They are not advancing, they are waiting. Across the lines, German panzer crews prepare for what they believe will be the war's correction, the decisive blow, the moment initiative is reclaimed. Their machines are powerful, some newly arrived, others untested. The plan is precise, the confidence is rehearsed, but time has already done its work. This battlefield has been shaped in silence, by factories far to the east, by decisions made months earlier, by an enemy that chose patience over momentum. When the first shells fall, the outcome will not hinge on brilliance or daring. It will reveal something colder to understand. Why this moment was already leaning toward inevitability. We have to step back to the war as it stood before Kursk ever appeared on a map. By the spring of 1943, the Second World War had entered a different phase, one that was not yet obvious on the maps, but unmistakable to those reading the numbers beneath them. Only months earlier, in February, the German Sixth Army had ceased to exist at more than a defeat, it was an exposure. For the first time, an entire German field army had been destroyed beyond recovery. The loss was not merely manpower, it was myth. The idea of German operational invincibility, carefully cultivated since 1939, had been broken in full view of the world, yet the Eastern Front did not collapse. In the weeks that followed, German forces stabilized their lines through a series of counterstrokes in southern Russia, most notably around Kharkov. These operations, often cited as proof of continued German tactical brilliance, achieved their immediate goals. They retook ground, they inflicted losses, they restored a sense of control, but they did not restore time. The Wehrmacht that emerged from winter 1942-43 was smaller, older, and stretched thinner than before. Veteran units existed, but replacements increasingly did not share their training or cohesion. Armored formations still struck hard, but fewer tanks arrived to replace those destroyed. Fuel, spare parts, and transport all became harder to guarantee. Germany was still dangerous, but no longer elastic. Across the front, the Red Army was changing in a different way. The Soviet Union had absorbed losses on a scale unmatched in modern warfare, yet it had not exhausted itself. Entire industries had been relocated east of the Urals in 1941 and 1942, dismantled and rebuilt under extraordinary pressure. By early 1943, these factories were no longer improvising, they were producing. Tanks, guns, aircraft, and ammunition flowed westward in quantities that allowed not just replacement, but accumulation. More importantly, Soviet command had learned restraint. The disasters of 1941 and the brutal attrition of 1942 had reshaped doctrine and leadership. Commanders who survived were those who adapted. Coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery improved steadily. Defensive planning became methodical. Reserves were held back deliberately, not thrown in desperation. Losses were still heavy, but they were increasingly purposeful. Between Orel in the north and Belgorod in the south, the front line bulged outward into what became known as the Kursk salient. Created by earlier offensives and counteroffensives, it formed a massive arc of Soviet-held territory protruding into German lines. On maps, it appeared as an opportunity. To German planners, the logic seemed unavoidable. A double envelopment could pinch the salient from north and south, encircle Soviet forces within it, and restore strategic initiative. It promised not total victory but correction, a way to shorten the front, destroy Soviet formations, and reassert control before Allied pressure in the west intensified. But the very shape of the salient carried a warning. Its existence meant that Soviets knew where the Germans would have to attack. Its size meant they had time to prepare, and the months following Stalingrad gave them exactly what Germany lacked most: space to plan and time to build. As winter faded into spring, both sides studied the same ground and reached different conclusions. One saw a chance to strike, the other saw a place to wait. Those conclusions would soon harden into plans shaped not just by generals, but by politics, intelligence, and an unforgiving calendar. In Berlin, The question was never whether to attack, only when. Operation Citadel, the planned offensive against the Kursk salient, emerged from a strategic environment defined by narrowing options. The German High Command understood that the balance of forces was shifting. Allied bombing intensified over the Reich. American production surged. In the east, Soviet armies showed no sign of collapse. A decisive action, even a limited one, was increasingly framed as necessity rather than ambition. The plan itself was deceptively simple. From the north, General Walter Model's Ninth Army would strike southward from the Urel region. From the south, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's forces, including the 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment, Kempf, would push northward from the Belgorod area. The pincers would meet east of Kursk, encircling Soviet forces inside the salient and destroying them in a classic Kesselschlacht. On paper, it resembled earlier successes, but 1943 was not 1941. German planners placed enormous faith in new armored vehicles meant to restore qualitative superiority. The Panther tank, rushed into service, promised increased firepower and armor. The Tiger, already feared, was expected to break through prepared defenses. Heavy assault guns like the Ferdinand were introduced to destroy Soviet armor at long range. Yet many of these weapons arrived with unresolved mechanical issues. Crews trained on them for weeks, not months. Spare parts were limited. Recovery vehicles were scarce. Each delay in launching the offensive was justified as preparation, but each delay benefited the enemy more than the attacker. Adolf Hitler himself became increasingly involved in the timing. Doubt and hesitation crept into the decision-making process. Reports of Allied landings in the Mediterranean, intelligence estimates of Soviet strength, and concerns over equipment readiness pushed the launch date back again and again from May to June. Then to early July, the Red Army used every one of those days. Soviet intelligence had detected German intentions early. The existence of the salient made concealment nearly impossible, but beyond that, German operational security had eroded. Radio traffic, reconnaissance, prisoner interrogations, and information from foreign intelligence sources all pointed toward a major offensive aimed directly at Kursk. What followed was a choice that marked a turning point in Soviet command philosophy. Rather than preempting the attack, Stalin accepted the counsel of Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky. Absorb the blow first. Let the German offensive expend itself against prepared defenses, then counterattack with fresh reserves. This decision ran against instinct and against earlier Soviet experience. It required confidence and discipline, coordination, and endurance on a massive scale. It also required engineering on a level never before attempted by the Red Army. Across the salient, defensive belts multiplied. Trenches were dug in depth, not one line, but several, staggered and reinforced. Minefields were laid in densities previously unseen, sometimes exceeding 1,500 mines per kilometer. Anti-tank ditches, obstacles, and strongpoints were carefully sited. Artillery was registered in advance, with overlapping fields of fire designed to break formations rather than duel them. Behind the front lines, entire tank armies waited in reserve, not as a last resort, but as a planned instrument of counter-offensive warfare. The Germans expected resistance. They did not expect preparation on this scale. By late June 1943, the battlefield around Kursk had become something new, not a meeting engagement, not a fluid advance, but a constructed space designed to absorb violence and convert it into exhaustion. When the order finally came to attack, it was no longer against an exposed bulge in the line. It was against an enemy that had shaped the ground, calculated the cost, and chosen to pay it. And while the plans now existed on both sides, their consequences would not be decided on maps or in headquarters, but in the lives of the men sent forward to execute them. For the men who would fight at Kursk, strategy arrived as routine. Soviet infantrymen lived underground in the weeks before the battle, packed into earthen shelters reinforced with timber and steel. Days were spent repairing trench walls, checking mine markers, rehearsing movement under fire. The waiting was deliberate. Orders emphasized restraint. No probing attacks. No unnecessary exposure. Survival itself was part of the plan. German soldiers experienced a different kind of anticipation. Panzer crews drilled on terrain models, memorizing objectives and lines of advance. Infantry units assigned to follow the armor understood their role clearly. Keep moving, stay close, exploit breakthroughs. Many were veterans. Others were newly assigned replacements who had never faced prepared defenses of this depth. Fear was present on both sides, but it was expressed differently. For the Soviets, fear was managed through repetition and structure. For the Germans, it was contained by confidence in training, in machines, in the belief that momentum could still decide battles. Neither group yet understood how narrow that belief had become. Kursk was meant to be a demonstration. German armored doctrines still rested on the idea of decisive penetration, punching through defenses and exploiting speed. The Tiger tank, with its heavy armor and long-barreled gun, embodied this philosophy. The Panther promised even more: sloped armor, powerful firepower, and mobility designed to counter the T-34. But machines do not fight in theory. Many Panthers broke down before reaching the front. Transmission failures, engine fires, and inadequate recovery support reduced operational strength before the first shot was fired. The Ferdinand assault guns, lethal at range, lacked machine guns for close defense, a flaw that would soon matter. Opposing them were Soviet systems built for reliability in mass. The T-34 was not flawless, but it was present in overwhelming numbers and could be repaired quickly. Soviet artillery, increasingly centralized and coordinated, became the true backbone of the defense. Mines, cheap, numerous, and deadly, did as much to halt advances as any tank. Technology at Kursk did not favor elegance. It favored endurance. Leadership at Kursk reflected two different philosophies of control. German command increasingly centralized decisions. Hitler involved himself directly in operational details, delaying launches and intervening in deployments. Field commanders retained skill, but flexibility narrowed as political pressure grew. Soviet leadership, by contrast, showed a new confidence in delegation. Zhukov and Vasilevsky coordinated broad strategy, while front commanders executed detailed defensive plans. For the first time, restraint was not mistaken for weakness. These differences would not decide the battle alone, but they shaped how each side responded when plans collided with reality, because soon, preparation would give way to contact. At Kursk, time was not neutral. For the Germans, every week of delay weakened the offensive. Equipment aged, mechanical reliability declined. Allied pressure elsewhere demanded resources. The longer the attack was postponed, the more its success depended on perfection, a condition war rarely provides. For the Soviets, time accumulated like armor. Each day allowed another trench to be dug, another minefield to be laid, another artillery battery to be registered. Defensive depth increased not linearly, but exponentially. What began as preparation became transformation. By July 1943, the battlefield was no longer raw terrain. It was a constructed environment, measured, rehearsed, and memorized. Information shaped expectations. German intelligence estimated Soviet strength within the salient, but consistently underestimated the depth of reserves behind it. Reconnaissance detected fortifications, but not their density. Reports acknowledged resistance, but assumed it could be overcome through concentration and firepower. Soviet intelligence, meanwhile, had a clearer picture of German intentions. The direction of attack, approximate timing, and composition of forces were largely understood. This did not guarantee success, but it allowed preparation without improvisation. The difference was subtle but decisive. One side planned for uncertainty, the other planned for confirmation. Kursk forced both sides to confront an uncomfortable truth. For the Soviets, accepting casualties was no longer merely tragic, it was operational. Defensive plans assumed losses, but structured them. Units were expected to be consumed slowly, trading space and blood for time and exhaustion inflicted on the attacker. For the Germans, attrition was something to be avoided. Their doctrine emphasized decisive movement and minimal loss. At Kursk, that doctrine faced a defense designed specifically to negate it. What followed was not a clash of brilliance, but a collision of assumptions. And when the first artillery barrages shattered the morning silence on July 5, 1943, those assumptions would be tested under conditions no rehearsal could soften. Just before dawn on July 5, 1943, the silence ends. Along hundreds of kilometers of front, German artillery opens fire. The barrage is heavy, deliberate, and familiar, a prelude refined through years of war. Yet almost immediately, something feels wrong. Soviet counter-battery fire answers back within minutes, striking gun positions that were meant to remain concealed. The element of surprise, never absolute, dissolves faster than expected. In the north, near Orel, General Model's 9th Army advances into prepared kill zones. Infantry move forward cautiously behind armor, but minefields slow progress almost immediately. Tanks are forced into narrow lanes cleared under fire. Engineers work desperately, often exposed, while artillery concentrations hammer assembly points with precision registered long before this morning. Losses mount without visible gain. In the south, Manstein's forces initially fare better. The terrain allows greater maneuver, and elite panzer formations push forward against the first defensive belts. Tigers engage Soviet anti-tank positions at long range. Panthers, when operational, demonstrate their firepower. For brief moments, momentum appears possible, but each breakthrough leads not into open space, only into another layer, behind the first. Soviet defensive line waits the second, and behind that, the third. Communications remain intact, reserves move according to plan. When German units pause to reorganize, Soviet artillery fires again, not randomly but targeting crossroads, repair areas, and fuel dumps. The German advance becomes a process of attrition rather than movement. Reports flow upward. Progress is slower than projected. Losses are heavier. Equipment failures increase. Panthers burn without enemy fire. Recovery vehicles cannot keep pace. Commanders request adjustments, more time, more support, more freedom to maneuver. The battlefield absorbs the assault without collapsing. By the third day, it becomes clear that Operation Citadel is not unfolding as intended. The Germans are advancing, but they are spending strength at a rate they cannot replace. Soviet units withdraw when necessary, counterattack when ordered, and always fall back into prepared positions. The offensive is still alive. It is not yet defeated, but it is no longer decisive as the struggle concentrates in the south. Both sides understand that whatever remains of German momentum will be spent there, on a narrow stretch of ground near a small rail station, whose name will soon eclipse the rest of the battlefield. Prokhovka. By July 12, 1943, the southern face of the Kursk salient had narrowed the war into a confined space where time, terrain, and exhaustion converged. Near the small railway junction of Prokhovka, elements of the German 2nd SS Panzer Corps pressed forward, seeking the breakthrough that had eluded them since the offensive began. Their formations were battered but intact. Tigers and Panthers remained operational in limited numbers. The belief persisted, not that victory was assured, but that it was still possible. Opposing them were Soviet forces committed exactly as planned. At dawn, the Soviet Fifth Guards Tank Army launched its counterattack. It was not elegant. It was not subtle. It was immediate and overwhelming. Waves of T-34s surged forward across open ground, closing distance rapidly to negate German long-range firepower. Dust, smoke, and confusion swallowed the battlefield. Engagements collapsed into close-range combat measured in seconds. The fighting at Prokhorovka was chaotic, violent, and compressed. Tanks fired at point-blank range. Vehicles collided. Visibility dropped to near zero. Command and control frayed on both sides. Losses were severe, particularly among Soviet armored units, which bore the brunt of German firepower. But the purpose was not tactical finesse, that it was interruption. The Soviet attack denied the Germans the time and space needed to reorganize, refuel, and exploit. Every hour spent fighting at Prokhorovka was an hour the Germans could not recover. German armor destroyed Soviet tanks, but did not advance. The battlefield filled with wreckage, but the line did not move. By evening, the reality was unavoidable. The German offensive had reached its culmination point. Losses in men and machines were irreplaceable. Soviet reserves remained. German momentum did not. Even before orders arrived from Berlin, field commanders understood the truth. Operation Citadel had failed. When news of Allied landings in Sicily reached Hitler, the decision to halt the offensive was sealed. Forces were diverted. Initiative, once surrendered, could not be reclaimed. The battle at Kursk did not end in a dramatic encirclement or collapse, but in something more final. The Germans had spent the last of their offensive strength on the Eastern Front. What followed would not be a pause, but a reversal. The fighting around Kursk does not end with a single order or a sudden silence. It recedes unevenly. Like pressure slowly released, German units begin pulling back from forward positions almost immediately after the decision to halt the offensive. Withdrawals are conducted under constant Soviet pressure. Artillery duels continue. Rearguards fight stubbornly to cover movement. The battlefield remains dangerous, but its direction has changed. Within days, the Red Army moves from absorption to pursuit. Operation Kutuzov opens against German positions around Orel in the north. Simultaneously, in the south, Soviet forces prepare Operation Rumyantsev, aimed at Belgorod and Kharkov. These are not improvised reactions. They are planned counteroffensives, timed precisely to exploit German exhaustion. German formations, already weakened by Citadel, now face fresh Soviet armies supported by overwhelming artillery and armor. Defensive lines crack under sustained pressure. The mobility that once allowed German forces to trade space for time is gone. Fuel shortages worsen. Equipment losses cannot be replaced. Units retreat not by design, but by necessity. The numbers are stark. German losses at Kursk in tanks, assault guns, and experienced crews represent a permanent reduction in combat power. While precise figures vary by source, the qualitative loss is unmistakable. Elite formations that once formed the core of German offensive doctrine are diminished. Beyond recovery, Soviet losses are immense as well. Entire brigades are shattered. Tank armies suffer catastrophic attrition. But unlike earlier phases of the war, these losses do not halt momentum. Reserves exist. Production continues. Replacement formations move forward without hesitation. Perhaps most important is what does not happen. There is no German counteroffensive to restore the situation. No sudden shift in initiative. No pause to rebuild strength. The Eastern Front begins to move steadily westward, not in a rush, but with a persistence that cannot be interrupted. For German soldiers, the change is immediate and unsettling. Orders now emphasize holding ground, delaying action, and orderly retreat. The language of attack fades from reports. The war becomes reactive. For Soviet forces, confidence grows, not reckless, but grounded. Kursk proves that the Red Army can not only survive a German offensive, but dismantle it methodically. The battlefield around Kursk is soon left behind, scarred and silent, but its consequences are only beginning to unfold. What Kursk removed from Germany was not territory, it removed options. After July 1943, the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front no longer possessed the operational freedom to choose when and where to strike. Every subsequent major movement would be a response to Soviet offensives, to Allied pressure elsewhere, to shortages that could not be solved by tactical brilliance. The shift was immediate at the strategic level. German high command directives increasingly emphasized economy of force, elastic defense, and withdrawal to prepared positions, concepts that acknowledged limitation rather than opportunity. Armored units, once the spearhead of decisive operations, were now parceled out as fire brigades, committed to seal breaches rather than create them. The concentration of armor that had defined German success in earlier years became impossible. This was not merely a matter of losses at Kursk. Itself, the battle coincided with a broader imbalance that could no longer be disguised. Soviet industrial output surpassed German production decisively by mid-1943. Tank and aircraft factories operated beyond reach of German bombers. Ammunition stockpiles expanded rather than contracted. Where German formations waited for replacements, Soviet formations rotated and returned reinforced. The psychological impact inside German command circles was profound. If rarely acknowledged openly, Kursk demonstrated that even when Germany chose the battlefield, prepared the plan, and committed its best remaining forces, the result was exhaustion rather than breakthrough. The Eastern Front had become a contest of endurance, and Germany no longer possessed the margin required to endure. For the Soviet Union, the effect was equally decisive, though expressed differently. Kursk validated a doctrine that combined defense, intelligence, and operational patience. It proved that German armor could be neutralized that initiative could be wrested away without desperate risk, and that counter-offensives could be launched with confidence rather than hope. From this point forward, Soviet operations grow in scale and coordination. The Red Army advances through Ukraine, across Belarus, into Eastern Europe. Each offensive builds on the last. Losses remain high, but the direction never reverses. At the same time, pressure tightens from the west. Allied landings in Italy force Germany to divert resources. Strategic bombing intensifies. The war becomes global in a way Germany cannot manage simultaneously. Kursk does not cause this convergence, but it ensures Germany cannot escape it. By the end of 1943, the question is no longer whether the Red Army will advance, it is how far, and how fast. And behind every subsequent Soviet victory lies the quiet certainty forged at Kursk, the moment when inevitability replaced possibility. The Battle of Kursk does not linger in memory the way Stalingrad does, that there are no encircled armies surrendering in frozen ruins, no single image that captures the moment of collapse. Instead, Kursk unfolds across fields and villages, through minefields and trenches, in decisions made long before the first shot was fired. That is precisely why it matters. Kursk was not the moment Germany was defeated. It was the moment defeat became unavoidable. Not through shock, but through arithmetic. Not through drama, but through exhaustion. The battle revealed that German strength, however skillfully applied, could no longer change the trajectory of the war. For the Soviet Union, Kursk represented something equally profound. It was the first time the Red Army did not merely react to German aggression, but shaped it, choosing when to absorb, when to strike, and how much to sacrifice. Victory was no longer accidental or desperate. It was planned. In this sense, Kursk marks a transformation in modern warfare itself. It shows how industrial capacity, intelligence, and patience can outweigh tactical brilliance. How preparation can defeat initiative. How the outcome of a battle can be decided quietly, before it begins. When the smoke cleared over the Kursk salient, the war did not pause to acknowledge what had changed. Armies continued to fight. Cities continued to burn. But beneath the noise, the balance had shifted permanently. From that summer onward, the Eastern Front moved in only one direction, not suddenly, not dramatically, but inevitably.